I was generally sympathetic to what they were trying to do. Whether they ended up doing it the right way or the best way, I think there are some questions now about that.
So it's the organization has evolved from just tort reform to being really kind of pro-business.
In this series, we've explored the meteoric rise of Texans for lawsuit reform and the men responsible for its success. We've also outlined the group's adversarial posture towards conservatives, culminating in its very public attempt at a political coup. In this final episode, we'll ask what happens when an organization achieves its goals but can't step away from the seat of power it's occupied for so long. And we'll ask, as Paul Burka did in 2009, has TLR become what it set out to replace? From Texas Scorecard, I'm Valerie Munoz, and this is Exposed, the Beast of Austin.
Is justice for sale in Texas?
TLR, I think, can crown itself with the laurel that they are responsible for taking a legal system and turning it into the model.
I think because of their power and their ability to raise lots of money from very wealthy people in Texas, they view themselves as invincible.
It's morphed into a beast of Austin.
I think Texas for lawsuit reform has long since passed its prime. It is on another path. It should just go away.
During a 2010 interview, Dick Trabolsi was asked, "In 1994, you came in and had some successes. You've had successes since. What do you still want?" Trabolsi responded, "We want eternal vigilance." Conducting interviews and research for the series, the common theme we've established is that TLR is no longer chiefly concerned with reforming the legal system in Texas. Instead, they've turned to controlling the legislative process and subjugating the will of Texas voters to big business interests in Austin. Here's attorney Mark Pulliam discussing this phenomenon.
They went into this in 1993 with a clear mission: we are going to fix Texas's legal system. And they had a lot of businessmen and women who shared that mission, and they were, home builders, developers, for all different industries, but they all had a stake in fixing this broken legal system. But in order to continue to attract donors, corporate donors, at some point you start serving their agenda rather than using their resources to fight for your agenda. And at some point, I think they've lost sight of their true magnetic north in terms of tort reform.
This appears to be the case. Here's Dick Weekly talking about the 2019 legislative session.
Last year, for example, we passed 8 major tort reforms, but then we helped 15 other allies of ours who had reforms important to the state, and that we helped them because we thought it was going to help the state. So it's the organization has evolved from just tort reform to being really kind of pro-business.
Back to Mr. Pulliam.
When big tech is writing you all this money, you start doing the bidding of big tech. And so by listening to your donors rather than staying on mission, at some point, if your donors want you to do something other than the mission that you were founded to do, you have to say no. We don't want your money if your money is going to force us to betray our mission. And I think they have, they've got a black eye over this, that this very competent, shrewd political machine has kind of gone into a ditch. I referred to this as mission creep, and that anytime your mission starts to creep, then you're no longer on target, and you're going to start making unforced errors.
Texas Attorney General Ken Paxton also believes TLR has lost its way.
They had a purpose, and they knew what their purpose was, and they were laser focused on that purpose of tort reform. When they lost that purpose and they tried to expand into other things, so they have really moved along the continuum from, I think, goodness to mediocrity to doing bad things.
TLR has become more interested in protecting their ability to wield power. Dick Weekly discussed how relationships between kingmakers and lawmakers typically work in a 2021 interview.
The key thing is when you work with these politicians and they take tough votes and they know that they're going to have opponents, in the next election, you gotta have their back. You gotta back them up. If people take tough votes to do the right thing for their communities, then you got to be there behind them. And lots of times it doesn't happen. People come up, Ray, we got to pass these bills. You pass a few bills, and then they go back home and they get challenged and they get defeated. And that hadn't happened for 27 years. We've had their back.
Weekly is describing incumbent protection, a typical practice among single-issue groups where they reflexively endorse and donate to incumbents. But what tough votes is he talking about? As we noted in the first episode, Weekly declined an interview for this series, so we can't know for sure. However, dangerous tort-limiting votes are decades old, and the trial lawyers TLR was created to vanquish are a shadow of their former powerful selves. Plus, we have in Ken Paxton an example of a politician who voted lockstep with TLR on tort reform, but found himself crossways with the group. Mark Pulliam has a theory about TLR's new mission.
As the enforcement arm of the Chamber of Commerce, and that's not what they were created to do, to be the enforcement arm of the Chamber of Commerce. They were formed to fix the legal system and to keep it fixed.
Now, the incumbents the TLR is protecting are standing in the way of broader conservative reforms. Here's Trey Traynor giving context to the battles the TLR's activity is impeding.
They're absolutely not as critical as they were back in the early 2000s, late 90s. The big issues of the day now are illegal immigration and the economy. And when I talk about the economy, I'm not talking about the business environment in Texas. The business environment in Texas is excellent. The business Republican is only worried about the bottom line. They're not necessarily worried about the future of the state or the future of the country. It's all about what are we doing to what's best for me to make money today versus the ideological Republican, who really is the patriot, who's concerned about what kind of state, what kind of country are we going to hand off to our kids and our grandkids.
According to reporting by Texas Scorecard at the time, one Republican lawmaker said, TLR doesn't want any social issues discussed. They'd really rather the GOP was more liberal on social issues, or at least not talk about them. That's what the Texas Family Project encountered in 2023. Here's the group's leader, Brady Gray, talking about House Bill 888, a bill that would extend the statute of limitations to sue a doctor in Texas performing genital mutilation surgery on minors.
And everything we kept hearing in legislators' office, from legislators, from staff, from different stakeholders within the Capitol, everything we kept hearing was TLR doesn't want this to go. TLR doesn't like this bill. They don't want this to pass.
After 30 years, the group appears to be making miscalculations that weren't present when it was first founded in the 1990s, and doing the important work of stabilizing Texas's tort environment. Dick Weekly, when asked about TLR's absence in the 2022 general election supporting the GOP's nominee for Attorney General, stated, "We want Paxton to win, and we will vote for him. But this time, others can save him." Weekly also claimed that holding seats in the Valley was going to be difficult in 2020 with Trump at the top of the ticket. This turned out to be incorrect, and the political miscalculation from TLR likely cost Republicans a seat in the Senate.
Why did you support a Democrat Senate race with millions of dollars and we lose it? We lose that seat. We lose a seat that could have been Republican by just a few votes because of what TLR did.
Based on a cost per vote analysis, a strong argument can be made that Republican Adam Hinojosa would have defeated his Democrat opponent Morgan LaMantia if it weren't for TLR's intervention. TLR was the top donor to LaMantia, Hinojosa's Democrat opponent in 2022, a calculation based on the flawed premise Democrats would dominate SD 27. Hinojosa, the Republican, needed only a few hundred votes to prevail. TLR was very clear about what they anticipated would happen if the Republican primary voters selected Ken Paxton in the primary election, that he would lose to a Democrat in November. No credible observers made similar statements, but TLR's weekly did so in public. TLR contributed over $3 million to the campaign of former Supreme Court Justice Eva Guzman, who finished third in her challenge to Paxton. Here's Mark Pulliam talking about the credibility hit to TLR.
You have to be shrewd. And what astonished me is how they basically blundered in a way that didn't seem to me to be easily explained, other than we don't like certain types of conservative Republican politicians, which that does not really fit in with the tort reform agenda, which, in my world, conservative Republican politics and tort reform had always been almost totally congruent.
Ken Paxton agrees about the damage the TLR support for Guzman caused to TLR's reputation.
They spent a lot of money. It was embarrassing to them how much they spent, and the fact that they supported somebody that got third place, almost last place, with a lot of money and a lot of their efforts.
In addition to working to unseat Paxton in 2022, TLR backed State Representative Reggie Smith's re-election campaign. Despite the fact that the Grayson County Republican is a trial lawyer by trade, and he was supported by the trial lawyers' PAC. To reiterate, trial lawyers are the group TLR was originally created to defeat. Smith was opposed by Shelley Luther, a political newcomer who defied government lockdowns in 2020 to reopen her Dallas hair salon. Although Smith won in 2022, Luther bested him in a 2024 rematch.
The issue itself, I think, had played out. I think they had won, and in most cases you would declare victory and go home.
With its primary purpose completed, TLR is in the midst of an identity crisis. Following the regular legislative session in 2023, a newly formed political action committee, Texans for Opportunity and Prosperity, began sending mailers to House districts. The mailers voiced support for incumbent lawmakers who voted to expand legalized gambling. The newly formed PAC is largely funded by two sources, Sands Casinos and TLR. Is this the next iteration for TLR, the pro-gambling lobby, or is this just one piece of a special interest power retention phase?
Texans for Lawsuit Reform has long since passed its prime. It is on another path. It should just go away.
In a 2022 interview, Dick Weekley described an approaching leadership vacuum.
There's some new young talent coming in, and we need it because the founders of TLR, Leo died 4 years ago, and the three of the founders are all 75 years of age. So it's TLR is very, very important of the infrastructure, political infrastructure of Texas, and we just got to find a way to quote sustain TLR by bringing in new younger folks, which we're trying to do.
Ken Paxton has a different prescription.
Maybe they get new leadership, or we fund another organization that can relook at this, but we certainly have moved past the leadership of Dick Trabolsi and Dick Weekley. It's time for them to go. They've done enough damage over the last couple of years, and it's time for them to do something different.
Instead of engaging in a quest for eternal life, would Texans benefit more if TLR accepted that its mission has long since been accomplished and it could just fade away? The reforms that are needed in Texas to reach the next level of economic and cultural growth aren't going to be attained through reforms to the civil justice system. That leg of the stool is strong. Based on our research for this podcast, in interview after interview, the resounding message from Texans was this: the areas where change is most needed are in areas where TLR, given its relationships, is conflicted at best and hostile at worst. We'd like to thank Brady Gray, Ken Paxton, Mark Pulliam, and Trey Traynor for taking part in the interviews featured in this episode. Until next season, I'm Valerie Munoz, and this was Exposed.
Exposed is a product of Texas Scorecard, the leading source on government and culture in Texas. For more information, go to texasscorecard.com.